Power shortages are putting the squeeze on Hong Kong manufacturers and others as well in the greater Pearl River Delta region. According to the Post this morning, companies are planning to maintain operations despite the blackouts, which are disrupting output and pushing up costs. This comes at a time manufacturers are reeling from the government's policy of boosting minimum wages. A rising yuan, add it all together, is it a toxic combination? Spot renminbi strengthened against the U.S. dollar. It's been on a strengthening trend as the Chinese have been trying to appease people on Capitol Hill. 649.26 was the Friday reading from 6.50 to round it off on the Thursday session. Ted Hornbein is AmCham Shanghai Manufacturers Business Council Chair. Also our guest host Clinton Dines from Caledonia, Asia, joins Martin and myself on the show today. Ted, good morning to you. In Shanghai, you know, with this program to hike wages among the workers in China and power outages, we were doing a story a little bit earlier about how some Guangdong factories are in shutdown mode 2 or 3 days a week. This is must be really putting the squeeze on a lot of your constituents.
Well, sure. Certainly, there's some issues with factor costs that are changing in China. But you know, AmCham Shanghai has been following this for about the past 5 years, and you know, we find that a lot of our members maybe are a little bit isolated from some of the rising factor costs because most of our member companies are actually investing in China for China. So that they're not necessarily chasing cheap factor costs. For those companies that are in a high labor, low value added type of industry, I think that potentially their days in China could be numbered. So you have to continue. First, you have to take a look at what type of. Go ahead. Sorry. Sure.
No, I was going to ask. I mean, you're saying that a lot of your members are immune because they're investing in China for China. How does that change the? You know, how does that change cost dynamics? You know, whether Chinese workers are making iPad 2s for a global audience or whether they're making stuff for a local one, aren't they affected or aren't they subject to the same, you know, to the same wage regulations?
Well, sure, but if you're in the China market and you're competing with other China market peoples, when the water rises, it sort of takes all the boats with it. I think if you're in an export-oriented market, and we see this in our surveys, that the export-oriented folks actually have lower margins and less room to deal with because of they're in a global market. Where in some ways the China market for the China manufacturers is a little bit more immune. But I think no one is immune from the rising costs at the end of the day. But what this really boils down to is that, you know, the days of easy manufacturing in China are over. So that if you want to manufacture successfully in China, you have to be doing the same things that you're doing in your North American factories or your European factories. You know, you got to bring your A management team to play in China. You have to implement best manufacturing processes. So you really have to be on the ball because your margin of error is becoming much less.
Interesting. Clinton?
Yeah, no, I think Ted's dead right. He's got the idea that you know, China's moving up the capital curve essentially, and that's the sort of thing that has to be, you know, has to happen inevitably. I think you go from sort of Chinese policy, you know, about FDI and manufacturing from the 80s onwards, and it's all about, well, we haven't got any capital, we haven't got any foreign exchange, we haven't got any trade, we haven't got any technology, and the policy settings are about getting those things in. But 20 years later, you know, the situation's moved on. They've got capital, they've got technology, they've got a good trade account and things like that. And also, you've had the entire population sort of rising in terms of living standards, so that, you know, there is a time to move on here. There's other factors that come into it, but you can see policy really over the last 5 or 6 years saying, well, you know, we've done that bit, now we need to make some adjustments, and there are side effects that they want to address, you know, energy consumption, they want to address, you know, pollution in the environment and things like that. And an implication of that is that the entire Chinese manufacturing curve starts to go from labour-intensive up the capital curve. And that, to some extent, plays into the hands of the skilled multinationals and foreign corporates who are much more experienced at playing in that space. So it can be an advantage.
Okay, interesting stuff. But Ted, though, in your experience with Shanghai AmCham, the manufacturers part, I mean, are your, let's say, members, are they moving on up, as they used to say back in the 70s, or are they moving west?
I get the allusion to the Jeffersons. Thanks. That's a good show. I think the well, okay. First of all, the majority of European and North American companies, when they invest in China, they're bringing their best practices with them. So they're not investing in sort of downscale facilities, right? But you do see an underutilization of manufacturing best practices. So I think a lot of facilities still have latent productivity available for them to increase productivity. But again, that's a management issue. And for those that are just chasing factor costs and just trying to move west, you know, I think that's going to buy them maybe 3 to 5 years, but we already see price pressure going up in western cities. You know, a large Taiwanese electronic manufacturing company moved to Zhengzhou, and because they needed to recruit 30,000 workers in 6 weeks, the base wage went from 800 RMB a month up to 1,600 RMB a month. But their model hasn't changed. They're still exporting their product. Even the product that's sold in China, they have to export it first. And you can't tell me that the logistics costs from Hong Kong into Zhengzhou are going to be offset by cheaper wages in Zhengzhou. And now that Zhengzhou wages, because of their move, are basically on par with Shenzhen, I don't see that. So the only way for them to improve is through productivity gains.
Mm-hmm. Moving up the food chain there, obviously. Quite a challenge, but that's what happens when you have a huge consumer market. You're trying to enable people. Ted, thanks for kicking off the week with us. You have a great rest of your week up there in Shanghai. We'll talk soon. Ted Hornbein from the AmCham Shanghai Manufacturers Business Council. More with Clinton in just a little bit.